He was once America's silver screen sweetheart, but last night, Richard Gere wasn't playing a role. He took the stage live and unscripted and chose the wrong woman to mock. Across from him sat Karoline Leavitt, a sharp-tongued firecracker, half his age but twice as prepared. What started as playful banter turned into a political ambush that left the studio stunned. Millions watched in real time as Gere's smirk faded, and Leavitt's final blow left him speechless. This wasn't just TV, it was a generational clash. A showdown of Hollywood charm versus unapologetic conservatism. And the way it ended? You won't believe it. Stay tuned. And before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories the mainstream won't dare to tell. The air inside the American Pulse studio buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled. The stage, polished to perfection, gleamed under LED lights that bathed the room in patriotic red, white, and blue. The cameras panned dramatically across the audience, a sea of veterans, faith leaders, small business owners, and retirees. Some held small American flags, others wore campaign pins, and all of them, regardless of where they sat, shared one thing in common: they came for truth. Tonight wasn't just another political special, it was a showdown. On one side, Richard Gere, a silver screen icon, the man who once brought America to tears in Pretty Woman and found peace in the Himalayas. He wasn't here to act tonight, but to speak, to preach, to confront what he believed was the greatest threat to compassion in modern America: a new generation of conservative leadership. On the other side, Karoline Leavitt. At 27, she had already shattered records and expectations. The youngest White House press secretary in American history, a new mother, a woman raised in a working-class family in New Hampshire who didn't inherit a spotlight. She earned one. And as the crowd murmured and phones lit up with live stream notifications, the host stepped forward. Nervous. He sensed it too. Something more than television was about to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the American Pulse. Tonight we bring you a conversation between two titans of different worlds, one from Hollywood, the other from the heartland. Richard Gere, Karoline Leavitt. The audience applauded. Lights shifted. The debate began. Gere was the first to speak. He leaned forward, his hands steepled, his voice soft, almost tender. I've walked through refugee camps. I've sat at the feet of monks and listened to stories that would break your heart. I know what suffering looks like. And tonight I'm not here to promote a film. I'm here because I believe compassion is under attack. The crowd nodded politely. Some even clapped. But then his tone changed, like a switch flipping. And what breaks my heart, he continued, his eyes narrowing, is seeing this country represented by someone who parrots slogans, not truths. Karoline Leavitt, he turned toward her now, theatrically, is not a spokesperson. She's a performer, a 27-year-old who rose too fast and learned too little. She's not ready. And our nation, our soul as a people, deserves better. The audience fell silent. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others turned to watch Karoline's reaction. But she didn't blink. Instead, she reached for her microphone, adjusted it slowly, and leaned in. Her voice, soft but steady, pierced the silence like the first chime of a church bell. Mr. Gere, I respect your journeys, your travels, your prayers in temples. But while you were meditating in the mountains, I was standing in hospital hallways 4 days after giving birth, defending policies that protect American jobs. The room shifted. You talk about compassion. I live it every day. For the single mother in Pennsylvania who lost her job because of unfair trade. For the veteran in Texas choosing between groceries and medication. A murmur swelled. You speak from your mansion. I speak for the people who can't afford heating oil this winter. And then she paused, looked straight at him. You say I'm too young, too inexperienced, but I know something you don't, Mr. Gere. Truth isn't a script, and America doesn't need another actor. The audience erupted. A woman in the back rose to her feet, clapping furiously. A retired Marine near the front pumped his fist. The live stream counter spiked. Twitter began to flicker. The host, visibly sweating, tried to move on. Richard Gere wasn't used to being challenged. He had shared screens with Julia Roberts, bowed to the Dalai Lama, and headlined global galas. Yet here he was, visibly rattled, reeling not from insults but from the truth spoken by someone half his age and twice as grounded. Still, he pressed on. I've spent my life fighting for the voiceless, he said, tone rising. While Karoline posts TikToks, real people suffer. While she parrots talking points, families fall apart. Karoline listened, lips pressed together. The audience watched her like a storm held back by glass. And then she stood. She didn't raise her voice. She lowered it. When I was 17, Mr. Gere, I was working 2 jobs to help my family run a used truck dealership in Plaistow. We didn't have time for red carpets. We were too busy keeping the lights on. At 20, I interned at the White House. Not to take selfies, but to serve, to learn, to grow. At 25, I was speaking for a president. At 27, I became a mother. Her voice faltered, just for a moment, just enough to show the weight of what she'd carried. And 4 days after delivering my son, while my stitches hadn't even healed, I stood before the American press and defended a man who nearly died on a stage in Pennsylvania because he refused to give up on this country. The silence was now reverent. No acting, no rehearsed lines, just real life. A man in the front row took off his baseball cap and bowed his head. A woman whispered through tears, "She's lived it." So, Mr. Gere, Karoline continued, stepping closer to the podium, you want to talk about suffering? Let's talk about the grandmother who lost her home when her pharmacy closed. About the coal worker who hasn't seen a paycheck in 2 months. About the border towns overrun, not by refugees, but by fear. Her voice cracked. You call my service cruelty. I call it protection. You call my conviction inexperience. I call it faith. You call my communication TikTok videos. I call it connection. A long, thunderous ovation followed. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was a reckoning. Phones across the studio were up. The live feed spiked into the millions. Hashtags like Washington Karoline claps back and Remember Real America Speaks began trending. The host tried to steer the ship, but the audience knew this was no longer Gere's show. It belonged to the fighter, to the mother, to the 27-year-old who didn't need permission to speak truth, to Karoline Leavitt. Richard Gere sat still in his chair, arms crossed, but his knuckles had whitened. He was losing them, the crowd. Even the middle-aged woman with a vintage movie shirt in row 3 had put down her phone. Now her eyes were on Karoline. The host cleared his throat, trying to shift the conversation, but Gere waved him off, voice cooler, more deliberate. You talk about connection, Ms. Leavitt, but all I see are short videos designed for likes. You're not informing the public. You're performing for them. He turned slightly, facing the camera. We used to have journalists. Now we have influencers. A few chuckles from the Hollywood side, but the room was split and more were listening. Karoline took a step forward. You think communication is a luxury. For me, it's survival. You gave sound bites to Vogue. I give updates to veterans who can't sleep unless they know someone's fighting for them in Washington. She let that sit. You think TikTok is a joke? My last clip on border security got 2.3 million views. That's 2.3 million people who heard the truth, without CNN or Hollywood telling them how to feel. A cheer broke out in the back. Mr. Gere, The future doesn't sit in a movie theater. It scrolls, it shares, it listens when it sees someone speak from the heart. The energy shifted again. A young woman stood, holding a sign. Karoline equals real talk. The host glanced nervously at his cue card. Gere opened his mouth, but Karoline wasn't done. You accuse me of acting, but you've made a career out of pretending. I speak for a president who nearly died defending this country. You play characters who pretend to care. A hush. You say I don't understand suffering. I grew up with parents who worked through winters in an ice cream shop in New Hampshire. You? You have stylists for your stylists. The audience chuckled, then clapped. You want truth? Here it is. Compassion isn't holding a candle in Tibet. It's staying up all night with a sick baby and still showing up to fight for a nation that can't afford to lose. The applause now thundered, and for the first time, Richard Gere looked tired. The host took a breath. Let's discuss policy. Ms. Leavitt, Mr. Gere accuses the administration of pushing cruel policies, border closures, deportations, trade wars. What do you say to that? Karoline didn't hesitate. Cruelty, Mr. Gere, is a word Hollywood uses when reality makes them uncomfortable. What's cruel? 2.5 million illegal crossings a year, children trafficked, towns overwhelmed. We cut that by 30%. We stopped drugs from pouring into Ohio. That's not cruelty, that's compassion for citizens. Gere stood. You call it protection, I call it fear. Fear of the other, fear of what you don't understand. Karoline stepped closer. Fear? Mr. Gere, my grandmother came here legally from Italy with $2 in her apron and a heart full of dreams. She did it the right way. She earned her place. Don't insult her or the millions who followed the law. She raised her voice now. You romanticize chaos. I protect order. The host blinked. The room was on edge. Karoline turned to the camera. America isn't perfect, but it's ours. And I'll defend it against actors who show up with speeches, then retreat to gated homes and private jets. She looked back at Gere. What were you doing at 27, playing dress-up on sets? I was raising a child, recovering from childbirth, and facing a media mob with nothing but faith and a microphone. The crowd exploded. Hashtags like Rang Karoline Truth and Our Gere Loss began to climb. The host whispered into his mic, cut to break, but it was too late. Karoline had just taken the stage, and the spotlight was hers. The studio was no longer just a place of debate. It had become a furnace of truth. Richard Gere, for all his fame, now stood at the edge of a stage that no longer applauded. He fumbled with his words, desperate to reclaim moral high ground. We need to return to kindness, he said, voice rising over the audience's clapping for Karoline, to humanity, to global unity. But it rang hollow. Even he heard it. Karoline stepped forward, not with anger, but a calm clarity that carried the weight of millions. I agree, Mr. Gere. We need kindness, but kindness starts at home, with secure borders, with fair trade, with protecting the citizens who pay the price when policy is made by people who've never missed a mortgage payment. You talk about unity. America is already unified. Unified in pain, in inflation, in job loss, in fear. And they're begging for someone who doesn't just fly over their heads, but walks in their shoes. The camera cut to the audience. Veterans with medals, grandmothers with tears in their eyes, blue-collar workers with arms crossed and hearts wide open. Karoline turned directly to Gere, eyes steady. I don't fault you for caring, but caring from a distance is not the same as leading from the front. She took a breath. At 27, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I have the courage to show up, to take the hits, to speak when it costs me something. Can you say the same, Mr. Gere? The studio fell into a deep, sacred silence. Even Gere didn't move. Then, a voice from the crowd. "She speaks for us." Another. "God bless you, Karoline." Then a chant began, first quiet, then rising. "USA! USA! USA!" The walls shook with patriotism, raw and real. Karoline didn't raise her hands. She didn't smile. She simply nodded, humbled. The debate ended with no closing statements. There was no need. The internet was already ablaze. Clips of Karoline's rebuttals hit 10 million views in under 2 hours. A meme of Gere, head bowed, with the caption, "Script ended, truth began," topped Twitter. TikTok users reenacted Karoline's lines. News anchors replayed her words. Political commentators on both sides admitted one truth. Karoline Leavitt didn't just win a debate, she captured a movement. Fox News ran the headline, "America Speaks, Karoline Outshines Hollywood Elite." Even CNN, reluctant to praise, acknowledged, "Leavitt's rise may signal a generational shift in political communication." Senator Josh Hawley tweeted, "Karoline Leavitt proved tonight why she's the future of the conservative movement." And President Trump, "Karoline just buried Hollywood with grace, truth, and guts. Proud of her. America's proud of her." In towns across America, people replayed the debate over breakfast. A diner in Georgia ran the clip on loop. Churches quoted her Sunday morning. Veterans posted messages. "She spoke the truth we've waited years to hear." And in New Hampshire, a small sign went up outside the ice cream shop her family once ran. "From here to the White House, Karoline, we're behind you." Gere canceled his post-debate interview. Reports surfaced that he returned to his Malibu estate and turned off his phone. An insider told Politico, he thought it would be a chance to speak truth. He wasn't prepared to be humbled by it. The New York Times ran a commentary titled, "When Reality Confronts the Script." Karoline was invited on Tucker Carlson that night. She sat quietly at first, then looked into the camera and said, "I didn't go there to win. I went there to remind Americans that truth still has a voice. And it's not coming from movie scripts. It's coming from people like us." She shared her story again. The working family, the used truck lot, the sleepless nights as a new mother, and the deep belief that America is still worth fighting for. The American Pulse studio had hosted debates before, but this one became a cultural landmark. Students discussed it in classrooms, churches in small towns played it on projectors, veteran groups sent her letters, parents showed their kids what standing firm looks like. Karoline became more than a press secretary. She became a symbol of courage, of conviction, of American truth. So, are you tired of actors pretending to understand your life? Tired of being told your values are outdated? Then this story is yours. Karoline's strength is your strength. Her voice, it echoes every quiet prayer whispered over dinner tables and every shout heard at veterans' rallies. If this moment stirred something in you, don't stay silent. Comment below. Do you think Karoline Leavitt stood for America tonight? Share your story, your struggle, your victory. And if you believe in faith, truth, and real American leadership, subscribe now, because this isn't the end. It's just the beginning.